we're going to start our panel discussion now, and we're so happy to have, of course, Roxana, our keynote speaker, stay with us for that. But I also want to invite Mercy Asiedu to it, who was the keynote speaker of our MICHI workshop and is also part of our FAIMI advisory board and working at Google. Thank you so much, Mercy, for joining us. And then also Maria Zuluaga, who is an author of a trustworthy AI in medical imaging book that was published in the MICHI series. And she's working at Joachim Sophie Antipolis. And just to mention, Maria will also be participating in the Women in MICHI invited talk, which will happen in a webinar series on next Monday. So if you're interested in that, check out the Women in MICHI page. I think it's a Facebook page, and she will be giving a talk there about the health equity in the AI area. So thank you so much, Maria, Roxana, and Mercy for joining. I wanted to start a little bit with a political touch of a question. And Roxana showed it so nicely. I feel that a lot of the fairness discussion came out of the American civil rights movement, or at least the seminal work by Joy Buolamwini and Timothy Gebru was inspired a lot by that movement. And especially with the political change that is happening, we were wondering what you guys think about this movement, especially in the United States, but also in other countries that is what you could call anti-woke, or I would say more a simplistic worldview. How will that affect our research field? Do you think that research in algorithmic fairness will have, larger issues to gain funding or will be hindered in any way? And we'd like to start out with that, and whoever would like to take that, please go ahead.
I mean, I think it's going to be an issue in the US because I'm actually I live in California. You don't know, California is probably like the most liberal state in the United States, but I'm originally from Texas. That's where I was born and raised. And in Texas, they've actually passed a law that you cannot have any diversity, equity, or inclusion programs, events, anything. And it's even gotten worse than that, where it's like they're looking at courses to see what's the title. So for example, like the talk I gave today would actually probably get, people in Texas in trouble if I gave it. Though I was joking with a colleague that I want to give a talk with a very bland title and then give the entire talk like I gave just now on fairness, just to stick it to them. But as that state goes, so could the nation, because they could borrow a lot of those ideas from, like, it's state law there. Like DEI at public universities is banned. And so as there's regime change in the US, a similar thing could happen either overtly or more covertly, at the NIH. And so I think fairness and equity, research is going to be severely impacted. And I think, for me, like, my thinking is like, okay, maybe I don't write openly about that, which is really sad to think about, like, in the grant, but like I plan to do it anyway, So, yeah.
Maybe Mercy or Maria have something to add.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, like the final statement from Roxana. What I think it might happen, I think it will have an impact because it depends on the policymakers where the money goes, right? From a purely research perspective, what I can see that might happen is that people start to sell, if I can use that word, their problems from a different perspective. So it might be, as Roxana said, we are not going to call it fairness. Like it's a problem that you can see it from different angles, right? So you might not call it fairness, but robustness to, I don't know, like data heterogeneity, something like that. So what I see it's for the pure purposes of being able to still being able to have access to public fundings. People might, at least in the short term, change a bit the way they speak about this kind of problems. I think people will keep working on it, but they might need to adapt to the mood right now, at least if they want to keep doing what they are doing.
Yeah, yeah, I think the funding, I agree, like depending on where the funding mechanism is coming from, that might change. But I also think it's kind of, I guess, the whole environment is it's so broad, right? Like there's DEI from workplace to hiring to education to how people talk to each other. And we are talking about medical imaging and health here as well. So I think sometimes too, yeah, I agree with rephrasing how things are talked about and written about, but there's a little bit of nuance too in saying, we need to create algorithms that work for everyone, right? We need to create algorithms that do no harm, that allows people to expand their business opportunities, make sure doctors are not sued for unlawful practices. And maybe that's a little bit of a different conversation from looking at people being admitted into schools, which we can have that conversation, and or people talking about history in exactly how it happened rather than covering up issues, right? So I think during the first administration, Trump administration, there was a lot of fear in the global health, from a global health background, among the global health community about funding drying up, with the US becoming very insular and looking inwards. And a lot of work funding that was applied to really, from global health professors. So the work still continued, but there was a lot more intentionality about, professors in the US, yes, still doing global health, but also looking at how the work they were doing could impact people in the US. So that changed a little bit. I'm hopeful that, that continues as well. And that, the conversation about improving health and for everyone doesn't get conflated with minor political squabbles or major political squabbles as they happen.
Yeah, I think I'll be frank. I think the problem is that, at least in the US, a lot of this is driven, unfortunately, by racism. And it's not like, I think that, like, how could you not want to talk about equity? How could you not want equivalent performance? So to me, like, when that is banned, like that discussion is banned, like it's like there's really nothing else that's at force. Like clearly they do not care about fair performance. And this is just it's a US perspective. I can't speak about whether or not these trends are also holding up in the rest of the world. And I think, I hope that we can continue to have a lot of leadership from the rest of the world in this space, because I think that this should not be having equitable outcomes for people should not be a political thing to me. Like it's like something we should all be striving for. So I think that it's very problematic the way the conversations are happening here in the US, because they clearly don't care if there's equitable outcomes. And that's the problem. Like reframing it in some other way is not going to, in my mind, is not going to solve the issue, at least in the United States.
Thank you all for your perspectives on this. We're also really both eager and maybe a bit nervous to see what's going to happen going forwards. I would like to shift to a second question. So another more recent thing that is affecting also medical imaging more and more is that generative AI is entering the spectrum, both through text, but also through image generation. And here, both defining and measuring and even mitigating bias becomes much more challenging. So where do you see the big next movements coming here, or challenges perhaps? I don't know if anybody would like to pick that one up.
Sorry, could you just repeat that? I think I didn't.
I'm talking about generative AI, so generative both through text models. So we're starting to see within medical imaging more and more combinations with text, where you maybe have some generated text accompanying your predictions, but also generative AI, where you have, or generative image models, where synthetic images are used either as explanations or even for reconstruction and things like this. And here, sorry, here both defining and measuring and mitigating bias becomes different and at least to my knowledge, also more challenging than with predictive models. So where do you see the big next movements coming here and the big challenges?
I think that the answer might be in part of your question, Asa, which is how do we do it? Because I think it's still not clear. It's very new. There are a lot of, especially in the medical field, there are still several technical challenges to get to use things properly, and I think like we still, I mean, like there's things like hallucinations, etc., kind of things that are. Did I lose you?
No, not me at least.
Okay, I think it was my connection that disappeared, like that it froze for a bit. So yeah, I think there are, I mean, it's moving very fast. So I think like we will be facing more and more problems, but I think we still need to answer the question that you're saying, like, because we don't have a proper way to assess bias. I think before that there might be other questions to answer regarding ethical concerns, and for that, I mean, there's a lot of concerns on all the data that these generative models get to use, and who's the ownership for that. I mean, there are a couple of cases in the US that still need to be ruled, and in healthcare it's even more sensitive because do a patient has the rights or some model that was some Gen AI model that was trained with some of the records, images, etc. It's are questions that remain to be answered, I think.
And I also think that you know, there is a huge concern for bias, just like you mentioned. There's just, you know, generative models are trained on data that is available, that is digital, data that's online. And so that is usually representative of areas or people or geographies that have their data sets represented online. That tends to be people from majority backgrounds in high income countries or higher income persons in those countries as well. So for instance, when I look at generating synthetic personas with generative AI, you know, randomly without putting any guardrails, I get a lot of software engineer, business developer, white male, 2 kids, 0 kids, you know, and that is a very simple example of, you know, the bias that lies inherently in these models. And I think it'll just take a lot more work and nuance. I think there's also been some studies that have shown that just looking at, you know, generating kind of like what our keynote speaker was talking about, just generating diverse images is not enough sometimes. And in other times, just collecting additional data is not sufficient, but really being intentional about what the application is and collecting and fine-tuning the models for those applications. So yeah, I'm quite anxious about broad stroking medical generative models that seek to do everything without appropriate evaluations and representative evaluations.
So Roxana, you actually worked a bit with the generative AI in the sense that you had these counterfactual images that you were using. Was the performance or fairness of performance of those models even an issue in what you guys were doing there?
So, you might see that I have a little friend with me here, so I apologize. The caregiver had to rush off. So, basically, we weren't really looking at fairness performance with that study. We were really trying to look at how the model decision changed with the counterfactuals. And certainly what we find is that, you could change the model's decisions by creating counterfactuals with specific features. And one of those features were darker background skin. One of my biggest concerns with, and maybe hopefully this will be less of an issue in medical imaging where our data sets are really curated from the medical system for the most part, is I worry about data pollution. Like even on the internet now, there's a lot of articles that are AI generated articles. There are images in Google search that are AI generated images coming as the first hits. And I think, there was a study in Nature, I believe, looking at what happens to large language models as they iteratively train on more and more synthetic generated data. And basically they kind of fall apart. It'd be, so I think in medical imaging, we probably have this issue a little bit less again because we curate our data. But like I can imagine like general image classifiers scraped from the internet could over time become worse because of this like data pollution issue. So that's one thing that I have like concern about. I think that could also become an issue with like vision language models, especially if you're scraping again from the internet and like have generated either text or images coming in to the data set that you're creating from the internet.
Thank you so much for those answers to the generative AI. I wanted to address especially Mercy specifically, but also, of course, Maria and Roxana, and ask, do you think AI fairness can play a role in addressing health problems, especially in the LMIC countries, or are the current fairness tools and concepts that we have at hand appropriate even for those types of tasks?
Yeah, I have a lot of the work that I do is trying to also understand how, to understand fairness in other contexts, in other geographies. And I think there's been, there's a lot of work and there still needs to be a lot of work done in like places like the US where we need to understand fairness by different by subgroups that are specific to the US, but there are also disparities that exist in other countries too. And sometimes, it's really essential to also think if you're from those regions or from those countries, where could unfairness happen? Among which people could unfairness happen? So I have colleagues who are, for instance, have been working on understanding fairness in India, looking at caste, religion, as well as skin tone, right? Because there is a wide variety of skin tones in India as well. And I've been looking at the across different countries in Africa and trying to kind of redefine how an algorithm could be biased. And it's a challenging task because there's less data, but it's also, if these algorithms are going to be universal, it's also something that needs to be addressed.
All right, thank you very much. There's a question from the chat, I think following up on the generative AI question. We're trying to reformulate now that we had another one in between. The question is whether there's a concern that using generated data from foundation models to train another foundation could lead to additional problems or biases. I don't know if any of you would like to tap in on that.
Let me give a try. So I think, yes, it might. And I think one of the challenges that needs to be addressed is is to be able to quantify that we know like what we are propagating. So it's something like, especially the problem is right now we have these big black boxes that we don't know what went in there. So we need to figure out of quantifying from the output without knowing what came in to train these models, of what bias they are producing, to make sure if we are going to use it, that if we can fix it, or if we are fine with that because we have some counter measures downstream that will balance out this bias, or perhaps we are fine with it if it would be the case. But we need to quantify it. As we collect black boxes in a pipeline, we will need definitely to find ways to quantify what we are propagating, for example, bias.
And maybe I can follow up on that, because one of the places in which generative models of some sort are certainly being researched, and I think to some degree also already used, is in image reconstruction. So MR reconstruction being an example. Should we be worried about that?
I think, I don't know if worried yet, but we need to look into it.
Yeah.
We need to figure out if it's what I said, like perhaps they're good enough and nothing is happening, but we really need to go and answer those questions.
Yeah, and I had done a little bit of exploration into reconstruction for ultrasound images a while back, not too deeply, but the issues of hallucinations also exist in reconstructing images. You have images that are generated that may have a lesion here, or a hypo or hyperechoic cyst that actually doesn't exist, but the model has learned from somewhere and just plugs it in, and it's a completely hallucinated image, detail. So I think it's really important to also look at hallucination within image reconstruction, and try to avoid those. Then also looking at the lack of representation in image reconstruction. If models are being trained on data sets that maybe majority white or majority thin, or things that actually impact the images too. So for instance, maybe ultrasound images don't work as well when there's a lot of high fatty layer, right? And your population that you're working on with reconstruction doesn't have that information. Then you end up getting errors when you look at images that may have also have fatty layers, and they are not as detailed or as accurate. So that happened quite a bit with ultrasound devices that were being developed in Japan, and when moved into the US, there were some issues with signal to noise ratio, because a lot of the devices had been evaluated on Japanese people, and in the US, because of extra fatty layers amongst populations, we found that there was actually the depth of penetration was worse in some cases. So I think that's something to consider on the hardware side, but definitely something to consider as we do reconstruction with generative AI as well.
Great, thank you. Then we have one last question in Q&A where we can wrap up. Well, another one just came, but we'll take the top one. And the question is about, with synthetic data, would infusing new information, for example, mechanistic or knowledge-based model simulations, potentially address some of the issues with collapse and synthetic data not being good enough? I guess it's more, again, towards Roxana's work.
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah. So the question was, with synthetic data, would infusing new information, and then an example is given, for example, mechanistic or knowledge-based information, potentially address some of the issues where the synthetic data does not add anything to the model.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if that's mechanistic information somehow injected with the existing like real images, or the addition of more real images. I think so. I think a lot of these things, it's hard to say without testing it empirically. So it's possible that it could be helpful, But I think that a lot of people, I mean, I wasn't particularly shocked, but some people were surprised at how model collapse happened with synthetic data. And so I think that these are questions that the only way we can really address them is to actually run the experiments and see what happens.
Yes, I think that's totally, I agree with that. With this, we would like to wrap up our panel discussion. Thank you very much, Roxana, Mercy, and Maria for joining and taking the time to answer questions. If you have a chance, there are still 2 questions in the Q&A, but we have to wrap up now. And I'm giving on the word to Ben, who is, I guess... Oh, sorry. Okay, Andy and Ben. Sorry, there were 2 announcements made that are left.
Thank you. So I don't know if you can see my screen now. Hopefully. I just wanted to say a few closing remarks. I just wanted to first of all thank all of the invited speakers and the panelists and the keynote speaker. And it's been an amazing event once more this year. I think for me, this FAIMI Symposium is always one of the highlights of my year, and it hasn't disappointed. So thank you everybody for making it such a great event, and all the people asking questions and answering questions in the chat. It's been really great to see that vibrant discussion.
I think we can't see the slides yet, Andy.
Oh, you can't? Okay. Okay, sorry. I forgot to click on the share button. The final thing. Can you see that now? Perfect. Okay. So I just wanted to say a few final things here, just to make a few announcements. One is just to recap on the Melba special issue that was mentioned at the beginning. So there's a QR code there at the top. So this is a special issue on fairness of AI in medical imaging. So I think there's lots of people here that hopefully will be interested in submitting to this. So please consider doing so. Just a quick advert also for our YouTube channel. So we have all of the videos from our previous events. So the 2 previous online symposiums. I think there's recordings of the MICI workshop. There's recordings of the RISE MICI summer school. So please have a look at that. And the recording of this event will be on there shortly, I presume. There's also our newsletter. So if you want to stay in touch with FAIMI and hear about all the things we're doing and all the latest announcements, all the latest initiatives, we'd love it if you could become involved in that. It's just scan the QR code or go to our website. You can sign up for that. We won't be bombarding you with emails. It tends to be maximum once a month, maybe once every 2 months, just whenever we've got something to say. And the final thing is that we really want to create a kind of a community of people that are interested in fairness. And it's really great to get people together for this symposium, but we want it not to be just a once-a-year thing. And so we've actually set up a Slack group now. And the idea is that this will become like a forum for people that are interested in fairness of AI and medical imaging research, just to get to know each other, to exchange ideas. If people have got problems, that we could sort of initiate collaborations. And so we just want everybody to get together and have like a space where they can discuss these things and form potential partnerships. So we'd love it if you could join that Slack group. If you're interested in this kind of research, you can just scan the QR code, or you can, if you sign up to our newsletter, we will be making an announcement about the Slack group on that newsletter. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. So thanks everybody again for joining. And yeah, we hope to see you on the Slack group or around at future conferences. So thank you, everybody. Goodbye.